Before you scroll past this, I need you to hear something. One of these 4 stories ends with something that has never been explained. Not by police, not by investigators, not by anyone. The person who lived through it still doesn't know what was standing outside their window every single night for 3 weeks, watching them sleep. Stay until story 4. I promise you, you will not regret it. And you will absolutely regret skipping it. I'm your host, and welcome to Fear Assembly. Story 1. The Tenant Downstairs. I want to start by saying I am not a paranoid person. I grew up in a small town. I've lived alone since I was 19. I've never owned a nightlight, never checked under the bed, never felt the specific, cold kind of dread that I now feel every single time I hear a door open below me. This happened 2 years ago when I moved into a second-floor apartment in a mid-sized city for a new job. The building was old, one of those converted Victorian houses split into 4 units. My unit was above a ground-floor apartment occupied by a man I'll call Darren. Darren introduced himself the day I moved in. He was mid-40s, average height, unremarkable in every way. Brought me a 6-pack of beer as a welcome gift. I remember thinking, great neighbor. For the first few weeks everything was normal. I'd hear him walking around below me at night, the creak of old floorboards, the murmur of a television. Standard apartment sounds. I didn't think anything of it. Then one Tuesday night around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound I couldn't immediately place. It was rhythmic, patient, deliberate. Scratching. It was coming from inside my walls. I sat up in bed and listened. It moved, slowly, from the wall behind my headboard, along the length of the room, toward the corner near my closet. I told myself it was mice. Old building, old walls, makes sense. I put a pillow over my head and eventually fell back asleep. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. On the 4th night, I pressed my ear to the wall and listened carefully. And I realized with a horrible stomach-dropping certainty that the sound was not coming from inside the wall. It was coming from the other side of the wall, the exterior side. I was on the 2nd floor. I opened my window and looked out. Nothing. No ladder. No tree close enough to touch the building. No animal I could see. Just the night and the sound of distant traffic. I started noticing other things after that. My mail had been opened and resealed, badly, with slightly different tape than the post office uses. There were faint scratches around my front door lock that I hadn't put there. Once, I came home and found the welcome mat in front of my door had been turned around, the decorative side facing down, the rubber backing facing up. A small thing. An insane thing to be bothered by. But I knew I hadn't done it. I mentioned the scratching sounds to Darren casually one afternoon in the hallway, watching his face. He didn't blink. "Old buildings breathe," he said. "You get used to it." Then he smiled, and something about the timing of that smile was just slightly off. Like a man who'd been told to smile, rather than a man who actually wanted to. I started doing research, looked him up. His name, his license plate, anything I could find. That's when I discovered that Darren, last name and all, had been the subject of a restraining order filed by the previous tenant of my apartment. A woman who'd lived there for 8 months, before suddenly breaking her lease and moving 4 states away. I found her through some mutual social media connections. I messaged her. She responded in under 3 minutes, like she'd been waiting. She told me that Darren had a key to my apartment. Not a copy he'd made recently. A key that had been there when she'd moved in, that the landlord had no record of. A key that she'd discovered was missing from her own key hook after. Darren had stopped by to fix a squeaky hinge. She'd never been able to prove he used it. Things had been moved in her apartment. Small things. Just enough to let her know someone had been there. I called a locksmith that same night. New deadbolt. New chain lock. 2 days later I came home to find a 6-pack of beer sitting in front of my door. Same brand as the one he'd given me the day I moved in. No note. I broke my lease the following week, and my landlord, without any argument, without any pushback, let me out of it without penalty. I asked him why he wasn't fighting me on it. He said, very quietly, "You're the 3rd one in 2 years. I've never gone back to that city." Story 2. What was in the corn? People romanticize the countryside. I understand why. The quiet, the open sky, the idea that you're far from the dangers of the city. What they don't understand is that the city has lights. The countryside has darkness so total it has weight. And things move inside that darkness that no one ever talks about. I grew up on a farm in rural Iowa. The nearest neighbor was a mile and a half down the road. When I was 15, something happened in our cornfield that I have never told anyone in full. I'm telling it now because I'm 31 years old and I'm tired of carrying it. It was August. The corn was at its peak, 8-9 feet tall, thick, impenetrable rows that swallowed sound. My dad had gone to town. My mom was asleep by 9. It was just me, the dog, and the dark. Our dog, a big shepherd mix named Colonel, started whining around 11 p.m. He was scratching at the back door, which was unusual. Colonel was an outdoor dog. He liked being outside. I let him in, assuming a coyote was nearby, and went back to watching TV. An hour later I heard it. Singing. A child's voice, thin and tuneless, coming from inside the cornfield. Now you have to understand the geography. Our cornfield started maybe 40 feet from the back of the house, past the equipment shed. There were no houses behind us for over 2 miles. There were no children nearby. And it was midnight. I stood at the back window with the lights off, listening. The voice rose and fell, rose and fell. It sounded like a nursery rhyme, but in the way a nursery rhyme sounds when someone has learned it phonetically without understanding the words, just the shape of the sounds. Colonel was under the kitchen table. I had never seen that dog afraid of anything. I did something stupid. I was 15 and stupid, and I went outside. I stood at the edge of the field and called out into the dark. Hello? The singing stopped instantly, and for about 30 seconds, there was absolute silence, not even wind. Then something moved inside the corn. I could hear it, the dry rustle of stalks being displaced, moving parallel to me. Not toward me, not away, parallel, like it was pacing me, like it was curious but careful. I backed up to the house, went inside, locked the door, and didn't sleep. In the morning my dad walked the field. He found a section about 50 yards in, where the corn stalks had been bent and broken in a rough circle, like something had been sitting or sleeping there. In the middle of that circle, laid out in a careful arrangement, were 7 dead crows, not torn apart, not randomly dropped. Laid out in a shape that I didn't recognize then. When I described it to a friend years later, she looked pale and told me it resembled a symbol she'd seen in a book about folk magic that she'd found in an estate sale. My dad called it animal behavior. He filled the circle in and never mentioned it again. A week later, the farmer 2 miles south of us reported that someone had been sleeping in his barn. They'd found a nest of old clothing and food scraps in the loft. Whoever it was had moved on. Police investigated, found nothing. I always connected those two things. I don't know if I'm right, but I know what I heard in that field, and I know how Colonel looked for the next 3 weeks every time he got near the back door. He never went outside at night again. Story 3. The Smile Game. I was 23 and working night shifts at a 24-hour pharmacy. Not the safest job, but the pay was decent, and the overnight shifts were usually quiet. We had one rule that my manager drilled into me during training. If someone comes in after 2 a.m. and behaves strangely, you press the button under the counter. You don't engage. You don't argue. You press the button. She said it like she had a specific reason. I didn't ask what it was. 3 months into the job, a man came in at 2:47 a.m. He was tall, dressed well, business casual, which was strange for the hour. He picked up a basket and walked the aisle slowly. This wasn't unusual. We got insomniacs, shift workers, people with sick kids. I watched him on the camera monitor and felt nothing for the first few minutes. Then I noticed what he was doing. He was picking up products, looking at them, and then placing them back, but not in the right spots. And he was doing it while watching the camera. Not glancing at it, watching it. Staring into the camera with a fixed, pleasant expression. He came to the counter with a single item, a travel-sized bottle of mouthwash. He placed it on the counter and smiled at me. The smile was the problem. It was absolutely, completely still. It didn't move when he spoke. His cheeks didn't change. His eyes didn't change. It was like someone had pasted a photograph of a smile onto a face, and the face hadn't gotten the message. "Long night?" he said. "Always," I said. I started ringing him up. "You're the only one here, aren't you?" I looked up at him. "We have staff in the back," I said, which was a lie. I pressed the button. "No, you don't," he said pleasantly. The smile had still not moved. I checked when I came in. He paid for the mouthwash, exact change, which he'd already counted out before I gave him the total. He picked up his bag and walked toward the door. Then he stopped with his hand on the door and turned around. "I come in here a lot," he said. "You just haven't noticed me." He left. My manager arrived 11 minutes later after the alarm triggered. I told her what happened and described him. She did not look surprised. She walked to the camera system and scrolled back through footage, not from that night. She found him in footage from 4 months before I'd started. And 3 months before that. He'd been coming in once or twice a month, always after 2 a.m., always alone, always buying something small and inexpensive. Always watching the camera. She called the police. They took a report and said they couldn't do anything because he hadn't made a direct threat. Here's the part I want you to understand. When she was scrolling through the old footage, I watched over her shoulder. 6 months of him, coming in, buying small things, watching the camera. I noticed that in every single piece of footage, he was already smiling when he walked through the door. Before he could have seen anyone inside, before there was anything to smile at. The smile was not a reaction. The smile was just his face. I put in my 2 weeks' notice the next day. Story 4. The figure at the window. Stay. I promised you this one. I need to be very careful about how I tell this story, because I've been told by people I respect that it sounds unbelievable. But I have photographs. I have a journal I kept. I have a neighbor who saw what I saw on one occasion, and who still to this day refuses to talk about it. This happened over 3 weeks in November, 6 years ago, when I was living alone in a rental house in a small coastal town in the Pacific Northwest. The house was at the end of a dead-end road. The tree line started about 20 feet from the back of the house. The first night I saw it, I thought it was a deer. It was standing at the tree line, partially obscured by the trees, and it was tall, taller than it should have been, but I thought it was the angle, or the dark. I saw it through my kitchen window while I was getting water. It was still. I looked away. When I looked back, it was gone. 3 nights later I saw it again, closer. It was standing in my backyard, maybe 15 feet from the house. And I was able to see clearly that it was not a deer. It was not any animal I knew. It was thin, extraordinarily thin and tall, and it stood upright. Its arms were too long. It was facing the house, facing, as far as I could tell, my bedroom window. I did not sleep that night. I started keeping the journal after the second sighting. Dates, times, weather, exactly what I saw, and where. I'm including the key details here. Night 6, standing at the tree line. Stationary for at least 40 minutes before I stopped watching. Did not move while I watched. Night 9, closer than before. Directly outside my bedroom window. When I moved to the window and looked out, it was gone. But there were impressions in the soft ground below the window. Too narrow to be human feet. I photographed them. Night 11. My neighbor, a retired woman in her 60s who I'd spoken to only a handful of times, knocked on my door at 7 a.m. She looked like she hadn't slept. She said she'd seen something in my backyard the previous night while letting her cat in. She described what I had been seeing, exactly, same height, same proportions, same stillness. She said, and I remember these words precisely, "It was looking at your window like it was waiting to be invited in." She never spoke of it again. When I tried to bring it up 2 weeks later, she cut me off and changed the subject so quickly, and with such visible distress that I never tried again. Night 14. I set up a camera. Motion activated, pointed at the backyard. Night 15. Nothing on the camera. But when I woke up in the morning, the camera had been repositioned, was now pointing at the back wall of the house rather than the yard. Someone, or something, had physically turned it during the night. I moved the camera inside and pointed it out the window. Night 18. The footage showed something at the tree line. A tall, still shape, barely distinct from the trees. It was there in frames for slightly over an hour, beginning at 3:12 a.m. At 4:19 a.m., it is simply gone, not walking away, not retreating. One frame it is there, the next it is not. Night 21. Nothing. The last night I saw it, or didn't see it, it never came back. I contacted wildlife biologists, 2 of them, and described and showed what I'd photographed and filmed. One said the shape could potentially be a bear, badly lit. The other looked at the photographs for a long time without saying anything, then said he couldn't identify what it was. Stanley asked me, and he seemed to choose the question carefully, whether I was planning to stay in the house. I told him I wasn't sure. He nodded like that was the correct answer. I moved out the following spring. I still have the footage. I've shown it to 7 people over the years. Most of them say it's probably a deer, or shadows, or a person. 2 of them, both separately, both people I trust, watched it and said nothing for a long time. Then one of them asked, "Did you ever figure out what it wanted?" And the other one, a week later, said something almost identical. "Do you think it was waiting for something?" "I don't know. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know why it stopped coming." But here's the thing that stays with me. On the night of the 21st, the last night, I'd fallen asleep in my chair by the window. I woke up around 3 a.m. and looked out into the yard without thinking, just reflex. The yard was empty, but the glass was fogged, lightly, in a strip about 5 feet off the ground, as if something had been standing very close to the outside of the window for a very long time. And in the fog, there was a single mark. I don't know if it was intentional. I don't know if it means anything. It looked like a thumbprint. From the outside. Those 4 stories were submitted by real people. People who have since locked their doors a little tighter, chosen ground floor apartments with fewer windows, avoided the countryside at night, and kept the lights on in the kitchen. If you've experienced something you can't explain, something that left a mark on you, that you've never been able to tell anyone, the Fear Assembly comments are open. Like and subscribe to Fear Assembly, new stories every week. And whatever you do tonight, before you turn the lights off, check the window.